Hi, welcome to Reawakening Beauty. I'm your host, Shawna Patruno. I'm so excited to have you here. I love talking about all things skin-related, beauty-related, and mind-related. I know for myself, boundaries and self-love and self-care are highly intertwined, and that's where the narrative of our conversations go, is that self-care versus self-love and how to encompass that. What would you say about boundaries and self-love and self-care?
I definitely think that boundaries are an important way to protect yourself and like all aspects of yourself, like your being, your consciousness, your sanity, your mental health, your physical health, even. Boundaries are a way to like protect and promote your own best interests. And I think that in and of itself is a really important part of self-care and fostering that self-love of like promoting yourself and protecting yourself.
100%. So as a woman, because I speak from my experience only, in my opinion, I really believe from what I've exhibited, I see this trend of a lot of people feeling like I can't say no to that. And I'll just give a prime example. So in my life, I model and I have a lot of different hats that I wear, like also hosting my own radio show and a few things. And I'll often get asked things and I feel like, oh, I have to do that. I've been asked something, so I have to do it. And it just has come to terms. And I know that that's not real. That's a narrative that I'm playing out in my mind. But often I have to step back and I have to ask myself, is this serving me? Is this to my benefit? And is this taking me where I want to go? And if the answer is no to any of those things, I clearly have to say no to that person, regardless of what they think. In your experience, Meg, have you had situations where people have maybe been put off by you having boundaries in your career, in your relationship? And how did you foster your own self-love when maybe someone is telling you your boundary is unacceptable?
Oh, I feel like that one's really hard because I feel like for most of my life, I have done kind of the same sort of thing where I'm asked to do something or something is asked of me. And I'm like, yep, absolutely. Like I'm totally a yes man. I will do whatever. Usually I feel like it's come from a place of I need to be accepted and I need to be wanted and useful. So for most of my life, I think I put my boundaries aside to say yes to people. And it's only kind of recently going on this sort of self-love, self-care journey and healing my own self-relationship that I've realized how important those boundaries are. And someone that I've worked with in the past has mentioned those same things you have, like, does this work for me? Does this serve me? Does this help me grow? And she sort of labeled it as the 5 qualifying questions that you need to ask yourself when you're faced with something like this. And 5 really important questions that will really help you identify whether this action item is the right thing to do. And just like you said, if the answer is no, then you have to lovingly let that go and say no. And I think for myself, I'm very lucky that in the past like year and a half or so, I haven't been met with resistance when it comes to putting up those boundaries. And in fact, I think that's a really good lesson because I think a lot of us are scared to put up those boundaries because we're scared of the resistance. We're scared of the rejection. We're scared of someone else's reaction if we stand up for myself. But the reality that I've seen is that people are, for the most part, extremely respectful of my boundaries and what I need and what will serve me. And that just makes it 10 times easier next time to be so firm in my boundaries and what I need and expressing that.
I couldn't agree more. So I think it's a huge warning sign when someone is disrespectful to your boundaries. I think that that's a narrative that just plays out of why does this person not respect my boundaries? And maybe they have a hidden agenda. And that's probably someone you really don't want in your life in the long term, of someone who doesn't really take to heart how things may impact you. I think that's a really great sign to maybe look at maybe a more toxic situation and feel that relationship out when someone disrespects what is important to you and your boundaries. In my experience, I really see that as a toxic, whether it's a business collaboration, whether it's a partnership, whether it's a love partner. When someone tries to push your boundaries to get you to do something, that's a form of manipulation. And that comes back to you knowing that you have enough self-love to say, I love myself enough that if people push back with resistance, whether it's a job opportunity, whether it's a love partner, that you can sometimes say, this isn't for me, and release it with love.
I think that there are times where it can be way more clear and way more muddy. And like, if I can just use like relationships as an example, like love relationships, I know that for me, like if I go on like a first or second date with someone and they try to, do anything that I'm uncomfortable with, and it doesn't even have to be sexual. It can be like, like going to, like if I'm like, oh, well, like I don't like dive bars, and they're like, oh, well, I only like dive bars, so that's where I'm taking you. Like those kind of boundaries. In those situations, it's very easy for me to be like, actually, this is what I said I'm comfortable with and what I like, and you've disrespected that, and therefore I'm not interested in continuing this relationship in any kind of way. Like in those moments, it's very easy. But if I look at, for example, one of my long-term relationships where I was trying to set up boundaries, there's so much more history, there's so much more connection, there's so much more like being intertwined that if I ever felt like my boundaries were disrespected, I felt like it was a lot harder to really stand up for myself because of the risk of like losing that person, if that makes sense. And I remember in my previous relationship, trying to set some boundaries about just kind of like what were deal breakers for me in the relationship. And this person kept disrespecting that and kept, doing these things that I had always said, this is a deal breaker, this is a deal breaker, this is a deal breaker. And yet, even though I verbally set up those boundaries, I never enforced them because he kept doing them. And I kept kind of being like, okay, well, it's okay. We'll try to work on it because you have that like intermingled relationship already. So even just like the depth of the relationship you have with the person, whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, or even a business partnership, I feel like can make it more or less difficult to really enforce those boundaries.
I think where the intertwining gets a little difficult is basically when you love the other person or you care really highly for this other person's opinion. I think that's where it starts to get gray because now you care about this other person and you maybe want this person to have a certain emotion towards you. But the thing that I've learned in my life is if this person doesn't respect what I need for myself to be okay, whether that's, I'll give an example, someone I had dated in the past, because I've had my struggles with food. I had to have like a routine with food. And this person did not respect my boundaries with that as I was overcoming certain things. And I realized like, this isn't going to work if you don't respect this boundary and something for my well-being. So then with my own self-love, I had to say like, person is not for me. And that's a prime example where you have to choose basically yourself. In my opinion, I will always choose myself over someone else. And that may sound harsh, but that's my self-love and my self-care and my boundary that if I'm not okay, then I cannot show up for anyone else. And if this person is disrespecting me, that person needs to go. And I think it gets hard when you love someone and you realize, I'm going to have to release you from my life because it's no longer a benefit to either one of us because clearly you're not getting what you need and clearly I'm not getting what I need.
I agree. Yeah.
So it's like a release of that. With business and with friendships, it's a little bit easier because you don't have that maybe hormones and all of that stuff going on and like this desire for a life and a future with someone. Whereas I feel like romantic relationships can go a little bit gray. And yeah. So Meg, before we wrap this up, because I would love to have another conversation with you on this, what has helped you the most with creating boundaries, say in a relationship and business and friendship?
I think that it really does come down to the self-love. And in all honesty, like I talk about the difficulty in setting those boundaries, but I also have talked about the fact that I've been on this like self-love journey for the past year and a half. And it's made a really big difference in my ability to set those boundaries in any kind of relationship. And I've thought really hard about those like 5 qualifying questions. Like, what are those 5 questions that mean the most to me that will help me evaluate whether this relationship, this action, this situation is fostering self love? And truly asking myself those 5 questions, I think brings it to the surface of like, I don't want to do this because it's not for me, or I do want to do this because it does serve me. And that just kind of brings the whole idea of, your own self-love to the surface of these relationships and boundaries.
Absolutely. So one of the questions that you ask yourself is this serving me? So clearly with like a friend, what is one question that you would ask like yourself with creating a boundary with them?
With friends, honestly, this sounds kind of straightforward, but it took me a while to do this. And that was, do I want to do this thing? And I know that like I've done a lot of favors for friends in the past, and I can remember the feeling of, I don't really want to do this. This is out of my way. This is taking my time, but my friend asked me to, and I don't want to disappoint them, so I'm going to do it. I remember having those like internal dialogues. So now the question is just, do I even want to do this? No, then I'm not going to do that.
That's amazing. I love that. That's an excellent question to ask yourself. So, to anyone listening, do I want to do this? And the reason why you might be saying yes, like for myself, I'm like, okay, do I want to do this? And why do I feel I need to say yes? Now, if it's, I don't think this person's going to like me. If this person doesn't like me because I have a boundary, that's a bad person to have in my life.
Yeah.
So I really think that boundaries are the thing that basically get the part and part crappy people out of your life. But it's for us to say, like, this is what I will do and this is what I won't do. But it's funny, the more someone gives in a relationship, I find the more I want to give. So if I find it's like an equal exchange, for instance, this is a collaboration, you show up, you contribute, it always feels good to me because then I obviously want to contribute more too. I think when you find that ebb and flow in any relationship, any partnership, whether it be work, business, love, it feels good. And that's where like your boundary is cultivating a feeling of happiness. And that's something that I find.
Totally. And it's just what you said. It's questioning the why, right? So if I'm like, I don't want to do this because it's taking up too much of my time, it's not something I agree with or whatever, but I'm going to because I don't want to disappoint someone, that's a very clear why. But if I say, I do want to do this, even though it's out of my way, even though it will take time, I know I really want to do this because I care about this person and they mean a lot to me, that's just a whole different perspective.
100%. Or maybe you're going to enjoy having time with it. Like someone asks you to move and you're like, you know what? I do want to help them move because I miss this person, it'll be fun. We're going to get pizza, whatever, I think it's asking yourself those deeper questions. Is there anything you wanted to leave our listeners with today, Meg?
Just really getting to the importance of your boundaries and what they mean for you, and like coming from that place of self-love. And I think finding those 5 or however many questions, those qualifying questions, are just a really wonderful place to start, because it can really help you foster it from a place of self-love rather than this place of I'm being unnecessary, if that makes sense.
100%. And where I think I'll leave it as well is, if you ever feel like you need to keep someone in your life by saying yes or putting yourself in a comfortable position, ask yourself why your boundaries need to be pushed and like why, because maybe that's just not the right person for you. And there's so many people who will respect your boundaries. So ask yourself deeper questions, like Meg said. So I'm so happy we had this conversation because I know boundaries are something I've struggled with in the past, and going forward, when you get amazing opportunities, it's still something I struggle with. So thank you for breaking it down with me. Meg, how can they find you on Facebook or any of those platforms?
Yeah, my Facebook is Meg Henkenhaf, which can be hard to spell, but it's Henkenhaf. And my Instagram handle is meg.hanks, which is a lot easier to find. So you can definitely find me on either of those platforms.
Awesome. And likewise, I'm Shawna Patruno, and you can find me at Reawakening Beauty. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for listening to the latest episode of Reawakening Beauty. Subscribe to the podcast, hear more inspirational stories and tips related to all things mind, beauty, skin, and soul. I also encourage you to check out the show notes for additional information about my guest, the topics discussed during the episode, and of course, more information about me, your host, Shawna Patruno. If you want to be a guest on the show or just want to reach out and say hi, you can reach me on Instagram, LinkedIn, or email. All these details can be found in my show notes. Thank you so much for listening and have an amazing day.